So something I wanted to comment on, because it's been now leaked to various Catholic bloggers and Catholic commentators, is the next document that's going to be released on the traditional Latin Mass. And if you're new to my blog and you've no idea what the traditional Latin Mass is, well, it's how we celebrate the sacred sacrifice of our Lord Jesus Christ. Do this in memory of me. The re-representation of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, when the wine and the bread and wine are consecrated, and they become the actual body, blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. For hundreds of years in the Roman Rite, we celebrated a very sacred ancient rite in Latin. Now, this rite went through a lot of changes, but in the 19th century, in the last century, there was a lot of focus on so-called full active participation in the Mass. Those that before the council thought that the rite was too remote for people to understand, that people couldn't understand Latin, that they were just praying a rosary, during Mass, and not actually understanding what was happening in the Mass. This was what people used to do during the Mass, pre-Vatican II, pre-1960s. A lot of people would pray a rosary during a Mass because they didn't know, a lot of them, what was happening. Or so the reformers in the church in the 1960s thought. And there's been tons and tons and tons of discussion and blogs and discussion over the last 60 years. So we had a council. There was a document in the council called Sacrosanctum Concilium, and from there was some proposals brought forth. And if people want to know where I, Robert Nugent, stand on the council, I have no issues, apart from that it was badly implemented, and that's my views. But anyway, what happened then after the council? Well, those that loved the Mass, that understood the Mass, especially a great French archbishop called Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, they weren't happy how the reforms were being implemented, and they continued saying the old traditional Latin Mass, the Mass that had been celebrated really since the Council of Trent. And then in 1988, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre consecrated bishops without permission from Rome. There was a division in his movement, and some stayed with the Pope, and the Pope granted a new society called the Society of the Fraternity of St. Peter, who continued to celebrate the Mass. And then you had, of course, the Society of St. Pius X, which Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre had founded. They continued to celebrate the Latin Mass. Anyway, there's a lot of discussion back and forth what we're going to do with this Mass for the last 50 years. From restricted, heavily restricted, to liberated. And then with Pope Benedict, there was a famous document called Summorum Pontificum, which allowed everybody to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass if they wanted. So any priest in the Roman Rite could celebrate what was called then the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite. Extraordinary. The ordinary was the Novus Ordo, and then you had the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite. So this is what happened during Pope Benedict. A lot of politics. Then came recently, we're during the pontificate of Pope Francis, and the powers of be in Rome have decided to take a different route with this. And so they abolished the previous document issued by Pope Benedict while he was still alive. I kid you not. While the Pope, they couldn't even wait for him to die. So they abolished the previous document that had allowed the Roman Rite to be celebrated by any, and they heavily restricted it, so that, you know, all Catholics in due course would return to the Novus Ordo Mass. Okay. That was, what, 2 years ago. There is a document that has been leaked now to Catholic bloggers around the world. And I can't say too much. And I won't say too much. But if you want to know my reaction to this leaked document and what they're going to do, I think, is this really where the church is focusing on at the moment? Is this where we've arrived to? Do you know it? But look, so this new document is going to stop all diocesan priests. So if you're a diocesan priest, you won't be able to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass anymore, even if you had previous permission. All diocesan priests will be stopped from celebrating the traditional Latin Mass. If a bishop wants to celebrate it, he'll need to have special permission from Rome. So say ordinations are coming up for some of the Ecclesia Dei communities, the old communities, they will need permission from Rome to celebrate ordinations in the old rite or anything like that. That's basically where we're heading. This is what's in the works. So what we will end up is, if you're a diocesan priest, you will only be able to celebrate the Novus Ordo promulgated by Pope Paul VI in the 1960s. That's the only Mass that you will be able to celebrate. That's what you would be formed, and that's it. So this is where we're going. So what's going to happen with these communities like the Institute of Christ the King, the Fraternity of St. Peter, and other communities that celebrate the traditional Latin Mass? Nothing will happen to them. They'll continue on as they've already been set up. You know, there'll be no changes. So the Fraternity of St. Peter, not much is going to happen to them. So basically, that's what's going to happen. The traditional Latin Mass is going to be spun off like a sui juris church or something similar to that. You know, it's like the ordinariate that you have in England, the ordinariate and in the Anglican Church. So that's where the traditional Latin Mass is going to be cornered into a little corner of the church. That's it. My thoughts on this. My thoughts on the whole thing. The finality of the Mass, the finality of the sacraments, are to bring us to union with God. Okay. And while many people have criticized Vatican II and criticized the implementation of Vatican II, and they look to some utopia situation in the church where, you know, we'll return to the pre-Vatican II, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. You know, we are called to have union with God, and you can have, obviously, the traditional Latin Mass has helped people have union with God for centuries. But, you know, we need to take up the challenge of catechizing people more. And the great thing about Vatican II is it has unveiled the need for true catechesis. You know, it's not just an intellectual exercise. Yeah, I've read a catechism, I know what's right and wrong, but do we live the faith in our hearts? Do we actually love the faith? Do we understand the faith? And a lot of people didn't. They knew the faith, but they didn't understand the faith. They could recite a manual, they could recite a book, but they didn't understand the call that God is offering to have union with Him. That deep union with God. And that can only be done by a life of prayer, a life of sacraments, and a life of entering into this mystery with God. So that's where we are in the church today at the moment. We have, you know, a lot of confusion, a lot of change, But, it's going to be interesting when this document comes out, when they completely ban it at a diocesan level. It's going to be interesting there. But I think it's the law of unintended consequences, Murphy's Law. It'll be the law of unintended consequences are going to push into the church a renewal that we haven't seen in 2,000 years. That's my view. But I don't know, what God has planned in time to come. I just think of all the things that we should be doing in the church, is this something that we should be focused on? I don't know. But I find, personally, my own personal, and I often hear this criticism leveled at traditions. Oh, you make the form of the Mass an idol. You idolize this form of the Mass. And I said, I just like reverence, silence. If it is the unbloody sacrifice of our Lord Jesus Christ on the altar, shouldn't we take time to prepare ourselves for this mystery? Shouldn't we take time to enter into this mystery of Christ's passion? Shouldn't we take time to make the Mass sacred? And in the traditional movement, they do that. In the Novus Ordo, you go into a church for Sunday Mass. Sometimes the chalice is just thrown there on the altar, or thrown there, the corporal just slung on the chalice. Like, what effort is being made for these sacred rites to show that this is something profound, sacred, beautiful, this otherworldly? There should be this effort. I think the traditional Latin Mass, over the last 50 years, because let's face it, those that retain the traditional Latin Mass had to fight for it. So they have to say it with reverence. They have to put effort into to catechizing people. They show that there's something beautiful, profound, sacred in the traditional Latin Mass. So, I suppose I'm going on here a bit, but if it wasn't for Vatican II, we wouldn't have this fight, this reform, so you wouldn't have this movement. And that's what we have in the church today. And I think a lot of Catholics, especially lay Catholics, were waking up to what has been destroyed, and we're asking questions. So, that's my views on it. What do I think of the Vatican document? I think it's going to do more good for the traditional movement than bad, to be honest. I think it's going to push more conversation. I think it's going to more publicity. That's my personal opinion. And if you love the traditional Latin Mass, well, then you have to fund it. You have to pay for communities. You have to go. You have to look for it. You just can't sit back. The days are gone when we just thought everything was going to be given to us. We have to get up. We have to love the faith, and we have to live the faith. I mean, that's my thoughts on it anyway. So I think the document will probably do more good than anything else. But that's where it's coming. If you're a priest, you'll have to select a rite. End of story. You won't be able to celebrate two rites. You'll have to select one rite. So we'll see what happens, how this plays out over the next couple of months, years, if the document gets published, and it will be published. But we've 20 something different rites in the church, and you select a rite. The Greek Catholics priests, they don't celebrate the Novus Ordo. So I suppose this is the end game of the traditional Latin Mass. This is the end game of the Vetus Ordo. It's going to be set up in its own ordinariate, its own rituals, its own sui juris structure, whatever that maybe in the next 10 years, that's where it'll be spun off and, you know, put under a bishop and corralled into a place, and that's it. You know, that's basically it. The communities that go to it, they'll continue to go for it. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how this works out. But again, let's stress everything, all of these sacraments, all the Mass and so forth, all have to lead us to a personal, intimate union with God. You know, the externals should signify an internal transformation in our life. And, you know, that's really important that we keep that in focus during this time. Anyway, God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.